Top of the morning to you. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. UN Chief Antonio Guterres sends bid to Russia to revive Black Sea grain deal. Moscow stages local elections in Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine. Plus, President Zelensky touts new Ukrainian-made long-range weapons. Thank you for joining us. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has sent Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov what he calls a set of concrete proposals aimed at reviving a deal that will allow for the safe export of Ukrainian grain via the Black Sea. Russia quit the deal in July, a year after it was brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, complaining that its own food and fertilizer exports faced obstacles and that not enough Ukrainian grain was going to countries in need. Mr. Guterres' letter comes ahead of a meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Turkish counterpart, Tayyip Erdogan, who are to meet and primarily discuss Black Sea grain exports. The Black Sea grain deal was intended to combat the global food crisis that the United Nations said had been worsened by Russia's February 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine are both leading grain exporters. While Russian exports of food and fertilizer are not subject to Western sanctions imposed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Moscow has said restrictions on payments, logistics, and insurance have hindered shipments.
In a letter I've sent to the Russian foreign minister, we presented a set of concrete proposals allowing to create the conditions for the renewal of the Black Sea Initiative. We believe that the Black Sea Initiative has given a very important contribution to make the food markets more adequate to our objectives of food security. It has brought down prices, it has created conditions for access to the global markets of many countries, namely in the developing world. And we believe it would be extremely important to renew it. And at the same time, we took into concern the Russian requests, and I believe we presented a proposal that could be the basis for a renewal, but a renewal that must be stable. I mean, we cannot have a Black Sea Initiative that moves from crisis to crisis, from suspension to suspension. We need to have something that works and that works to the benefit of everybody.
Can you give us any details? Can you give us any details on those specific proposals?
The proposal is relating to the need, as I said, to reestablish the Black Sea Initiative, and at the same time, we have some concrete solutions for the concerns, allowing for an effective, a more effective access of Russian food and fertilizers to global markets at adequate prices. And I believe that working seriously, we can have a positive solution for everybody, for the Ukraine, for the Russian Federation, but more important than everything else, for the world in a moment in which so many countries are facing enormous difficulties in relation to guarantee the food security of their populations.
Meanwhile, that positive situation is what Russia sees no sign it'll receive the guarantees that allow it to resume the deal permitting Ukraine, one of the world's main exporters, to ship grain through the Black Sea. These are the words of Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who is suspicious Russian grain and fertilizer will not be allowed passage. After a meeting with the Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mr. Lavrov said Russia is prepared to return to the deal immediately if its demands are met, but there was no sign of that happening. Mr. Lavrov added that Russia is committed to increasing gas exports to Turkey and creating a gas hub there.
As before, in this message of the UN Secretary General on the resumption of the grain deal, there is not a single guarantee. There are only promises to try faster, to try more actively, and everything comes down to the fact that solutions to problems that prevent a more active export of Russian grain and Russian fertilizers are hampered by the West.
Meanwhile, Russian-installed authorities have been holding regional elections in parts of Russian-controlled Ukraine. The exercise started on Thursday in areas Russia claimed as its own last year, where a few residents came out to cast their ballots, showing newly distributed Russian passports to officials while police officers stood by. Russia does not fully control any of the 4 regions where the votes are being held. That's Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Along with Crimea, annexed by Moscow in 2014, these regions make up almost a fifth of Ukraine. 3/4 of countries at the United Nations General Assembly condemned what they term Russia's attempted illegal annexation of the 4 regions in a vote last October. In all 4 regions, Moscow's governors, a mix of veteran pro-Russian politicians and others known only locally, are seeking full terms of office in the polls, which conclude on September the 10th. Ukraine's mayor of the Russian-occupied city of Mariupol is describing the ongoing polls as sham elections. In his words, forcing residents at gunpoint to vote. Mayor Vadim Boychenko added there were no voter lists, no candidate lists, and that anyone carrying a Russian passport could cast a vote. Apart from the votes in the Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine, a host of Russian provinces are set to vote for governors and regional legislature on September the 10th. Russia's security services says its FSB has killed and detained members of a Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group in the Bryansk region, which borders Ukraine. In a statement, it said 2 of the fighters had been killed on Wednesday evening in the Navlinsky district, just south of the regional capital, and 5 detained, 3 of whom are injured. Footage aired on the state-run television news channel Rossiya 24 showed 7 automatic rifles, along with 24 magazines and a dozen grenades allegedly captured in the operation. The FSB says the group had been equipped with American-made machine guns with silencers, explosives, and a large number of NATO-style grenades and cartridges. It added that the group included members of the Ukrainian intelligence services and military special forces. Bryansk and other provinces adjoining Ukraine have increasingly suffered drone attacks, shelling, explosions, and armed incursions this year, for which Russia blames Ukraine. And Russian officials are claiming that Ukrainian drones have targeted Russia's capital and a southwestern region bordering Ukraine early today. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin says air defenses downed the drone approaching the capital overnight. No casualties or damage was reported. Meanwhile, in the Kursk region, a Ukrainian drone targeted the city of Kurchatov in the early hours of today. Kursk Governor Roman Starovoit says the drone hit a run-on residential building, damaging its facade. Starovoit earlier said 2 drones had targeted the town, but later says the fall of the second one could not be confirmed. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced that the Ukrainian-made long-range weapon has successfully hit a target at a distance of 700 kilometers. He did not, however, provide any images or say what kind of weapon it was. Neither did he reveal where or when the weapon was used. President Zelensky discussed the launch with top military and government officials and wrote about it on Telegram. We now bring in expert at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy Ukraine, Dr. Olena Sneger, who joins us virtually from Florence in Italy. Dr. Laskovo Prosimo, Dobroho ranko.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us.
Доброго ранку.
It's a good place to begin, where we find that President Volodymyr Zelensky doesn't have a lot of friends internationally amongst his peers, presidents of other countries, prime ministers of other countries, leaders of other countries. He's been forced into this corner where he relies on his relationship with the Turkish president, Tayyip Erdogan, North Korea now, lately, possibly Viktor Orban of Hungary, and the list gets smaller. In this meeting they're to have, that is Erdogan and Putin in Sochi, the resort town in Russia, are you confident that something will come of it to revive the Black Sea grain deal?
Well, Russia was the part which broke the grain deal, and Russia is obviously very interested in recovering or renewing the grain deal. But Russia is putting on the table new demands which are not connected directly to the grain deal. So it's actually depends on Russian behavior if this grain deal will work or not, because there are, like, everyone obviously is interested in continuation in this working deal of grain supply to other countries, of export of Ukrainian grain. And Ukraine has a grain to be exported, but it depends just how this grain will be exported, with Russian participation or not right now, because it seems that Ukraine with the partners has found the alternative route, more or less safe route, to export, well, not maybe the huge amounts of its grain, but at least something. And Russian ships now are like, they're trying to get to be as much close to the ports as it is possible, due to some recent developments in the sea, on the sea. So it depends that Russia is looking for some.
Dr. Snigger, you're referring, of course, to that humanitarian corridor, right, that hugs between both Poland and Bulgaria. We'll try and reestablish contact with Dr. Olena Snigger, who's joined us speaking about the Black Sea grain deal. She was making a point about how some produce was being exported, though in small amounts, through the humanitarian corridor provided by Ukraine, for which it was not significant enough an amount to be called an alternative, but it is something that can be useful nonetheless. We'll try and reestablish contact with her. In the meantime, after the break.
Unilateral actions on trade by the two member states.
Volunteer killed while fighting in Ukraine. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome to the Soul for More stretch this Friday on today's special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. A 22-year-old British volunteer, Sam Newey, who was fighting on the front lines in Ukraine, has been killed. His brother, Dan, who reported the incidents, gave a tribute to the fallen soldier in these words: "I cannot put into words how broken I feel. I also cannot emphasize how proud I am of my little brother. Sam, you gave your life for people you never knew and acted with courage, morality, and honor. Not only are you my little brother, you're an exceptional man, a good soldier, and one of the bravest people I ever had the privilege of knowing." Now, we again join Dr. Elena Snigger, who joins us from out of Florence in Italy, speaking on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Doctor, we lost you for a bit, but we found you. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm really sorry. I lost connection for a minute.
No problem. Technology. Now, could we go back to where we were on the Black Sea grain deal? But one of the grouses, or a major grouse that Russia has with Ukraine concerning the Black Sea grain deal, for which it was one of the reasons they pulled out, according to them, is that they accuse Ukraine of not selling the grain to the countries that need it the most. In other words, they were saying that while the deal was operational, Ukraine was selling it to the highest bidders and not to the countries for which Ukraine was saying they were going to sell them to in the first place. Is that true?
Well, it's the matter of it's the matter of the market. So Ukraine is selling its grain to the big dealers, which buy the grain and then selling it to the countries which buy this grain from these grain dealers. So it depends on the contract and on the market. Ukraine is selling, as soon as I know, Ukraine is selling its grain to China, to European countries, and to African countries in different proportions. So it just depends on who is going to buy the grain and according to its own demands and to its own standards, because also different countries has different standards. And according to this situation in Ukraine, the Ukrainian grain is obviously not probably satisfying the standards of many countries. Well, it's just my guess, but I cannot speak more detailed about this issue.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the United Nations involvement in, as we saw Guterres, the UN chief, talking about the concrete proposals, as he put it, the concrete proposals he sends to Sergei Lavrov to resuscitate the deal. The United Nations has been in a place where it's been criticized largely over the years on whether or not it has enough influence at any level to actually mediate and fulfill the functions for which it was set up. Some has gone as far, and I'm not repeating it because we're in agreement with it, but it's on record. Some has gone as far as to say the United Nations is a toothless bulldog. In the first place, where conflicts such as this escalate to this situation and there's nothing they can do about it. But now that Mr. Guterres is really trying to get this deal back on track, what is your estimation of the UN involvement in the Black Sea grain deal and its involvement in trying to end this war in Ukraine?
My estimation is quite pessimistic about the role of the UN in this grain deal, as also about the role of the UN in the whole dealing process with the war, Russian war in Ukraine, because Russia is a member of Security Council of the United Nations, and we can see that all conflicts where Russia is involved or was involved, where UN was helpless in all conflicts and is helpless. It obviously can do nothing but just be a platform for big discussions, political discussions, and for making some negotiations and for achieving some deals on the margins of UN or on the margins of UN Security Council meetings. So in this moment, according to this grain deal and according to the whole Russian war with Ukraine, the final influence or the crucial influence belongs to the local actors, to the regional actors, and to the global players. Such as, for example, in the grain deal, there is big Turkish interest and Chinese interest, of course, and interest of those countries who are buying this grain and who are interested in having good prices for this grain. So about the war in Ukraine, we see that the main influence on the position or on of parties or on lives of people causes not the UN missions or the UN councils or something which is coming from the UN, but the main influence is being caused by military power. So military force is crucial here, and it's very dangerous situation, of course, for the whole global peace and global world, because we have the situation now when the the global actor with the nuclear power attacked and attacks their country which doesn't have nuclear power, it doesn't have nuclear weapon, and it undermines the whole system of international relations. And we see that the United Nations can do nothing about it, but just to continue to be some platform for dialogue. So it's also the question and the matter for discussion for many countries in the world about their own security. Should they rely on the mechanisms and instruments of the United Nations, or should they think about some other ways to guarantee their own security? Because Ukraine is a very good example that Ukraine relied on these global mechanisms and global instruments and the set of rules. And Ukraine now has a war in its territory and is being torn up. So it's the matter of a big, big discussion, actually.
Yes, indeed. Very concerning, Dr. Snigger. Now, to how the war is affecting young Ukrainians in Ukraine under the age of 18, it's been a particular concern of mine, and I'm sure of all, on the psychological impact of this war. In Kharkiv, I believe there's been a proposal to continue education in bunkers so that the kids can learn in spite of the war going on over their heads, essentially creating for them a safe haven below the ground where they can, I think they're using train stations, where they can, underground subway stations, to continue their education. It's hard enough to raise a teenager whose hormones are jangling and they're just trying to discover themselves in peacetime than to raise a teenager or children in wartime, where you have to explain to them constantly why there's so much death, why there's so much fear, why there's so much conflict. Is the Ukrainian educational sector and the security services going about it the right way to try and continue education in the midst of a war by using underground classrooms?
Yeah, there is such an initiative in Kharkiv and in many cities in Ukraine. People like school teachers and school administrations, they are doing their best to continue the education and to find the safe places for the kids to study, to continue, not to continue the education even during the air alarms. I personally know a few examples from my hometown and from my friends, where parents, together with school administrations, they personally try to make this environment, underground environment, as comfortable as possible for their kids. But you're absolutely right saying that it's very traumatic for kids, and constantly being in this situation of fear and of tension and of stress, they can lose their cognitive abilities, at least for some time. So it's really a matter of issue in Ukraine. But from the other side, I also know that kids are very adaptive. So my friends also tell my friends with kids who are in Ukraine, they also share that their kids just accept this reality, like, okay, there are these air radars and air alarms, and there are these shellings. Oh, okay, so fine, they were the last week and they will be probably the next week. So why should we interrupt our daily activities due to them? So kids get used to it. Their psychology is quite flexible. Unfortunately, it also increases the risk of for them, like they are not seeing the necessity to hide. So it's also the responsibility of adults to teach them. But this is like the basic rules of survival in Ukraine right now. Yeah, it's hard actually. It's the reality of war, unfortunately.
Indeed, it becomes like the new normal for kids, which presents an entirely different and dangerous proposition in the long term. Thank you, Doctor. And finally, just before we let you go, you're in Florence, Italy, and I really commiserate with you on this invasion of your country and how you must feel. Are there fellow Ukrainians in Italy? Are there platforms in Italy where Ukrainians get together to encourage each other and sort of also send messages across to Zelensky and your people to help in domestic policy and to encourage the people back home?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, here in Italy, we, as in many other countries all around the world and in Europe, Ukrainians are sticking together and encourage each other, and especially because the most like Ukrainians here are Ukraine. Sorry. Am I online still?
Yes, you are. We can hear you. Go on.
Sorry. Yeah. So Ukrainians here are mostly women with children. And that's why we of course we gather together and encourage each other. And I am also here with my kid and who goes to Italian school. But we are here. We here try to support each other and share, of course.
It must be very difficult, and we do express our sincere sympathy for the situation that you and all Ukrainians are going through, and everyone adversely affected by this war. Thank you so much, Dr. Olena Sniger, who is an expert for global studies strategy in Ukraine, but who joins us from out of Florence, Italy. Thank you for making out the time. Diakoyu and Bovita.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba hit out at critics of Kyiv's tactics in its counteroffensive against Russia's invasion, saying they were spitting in the faces of Ukrainian soldiers and should shut up, in their words. He was speaking to reporters at a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Toledo, Spain. The New York Times last week quoted US and other Western officials as saying that the offensive had made limited progress because Ukraine had too many troops in the wrong places.
Criticizing the slow pace of counteroffensive equals to spitting into the face of Ukrainian soldier who sacrifices his life every day, moving forward and liberating 1 kilometer of Ukrainian soil after another. I would recommend all critics to shut up, come to Ukraine, and try to liberate 1 square centimeter by themselves.
Kyiv authorities have announced plans to build up more fortifications due to the risk of more Russian attacks. Russian forces tried to take the capital in the first phase of their full-scale invasion, but retreated after facing fierce Ukrainian resistance. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko confirmed Kyiv will allocate 800-millimeter hryvnias, which is equivalent to 21.7 million, that currency, beg your pardon, currency which is equivalent to $21.7 million to build fortifications and for other urgent military needs. He also said he will make separate amendments for consideration in the city's budget to allocate $300 million of their currency, about $8.1 million for the needs of Ukraine's armed forces. The head of Ukraine's military administration, Serhiy Popko, believes Kyiv is and will be the #1 priority target for Russia. Russia's defense ministry says that a Russian fighter jet took off to escort the Norwegian P-8A Poseidon patrol aircraft over the Barents Sea. The defense ministry said in a statement on the Telegram messaging app that when a Russian fighter aircraft approached, the foreign military aircraft made a U-turn from the state border of the Russian Federation, and violation of the state border of the Russian Federation is not allowed. It's not yet clear if the Norwegian aircraft route had any links to the continuing war in Ukraine. When we return, Prigozhin's right-hand man, Dmitry Wagner Utkin, buried quietly near Moscow. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Now, we're joined by former ambassador to Switzerland, Dr. Humphrey Ojako, who speaks virtually from Abuja, Nigeria's federal capital territory. Thank you for making out the time to be with us, sir, and good morning.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has touted the success of a Ukrainian-made long-range weapon. The rest of the details is shrouded in secrecy. When the weapon was made, what the weapon hit, for it said it hit a target of about 700 kilometers in distance. Is this maybe not unconnected? And I want your buy-in on the entire weapons delivery to Ukraine affair with the establishment of a British arms manufacturing aerospace company now in Ukraine, with also that kind of not being not much disclosure about that particular company, but it's now going to be operational in Ukraine. And it's part of the discussion of the escalation of the war hinged on the supply of weapons. And now with Ukraine bolstering its own weapons supply by manufacturing weapons in Ukraine, which is their target, what's your general impression of the war? And Ukraine, now that it's making its own weapons and will continue to make weapons, and the British are helping them to make these weapons in Ukraine with this private British company, what do you see as the next phase of this conflict?
Thank you very much for raising that question. You know, at the beginning of this war, it's virtually going on to a year and 9 months, we discussed this issue on this channel. And the thinking was, if Russia did not win this war within the first 3 months, 6 months, it will become a very difficult war for Russia to fight, a very devastating war, yes, for Ukraine, and a very difficult time for both the United Nations and the international community. And what we thought then has come to become reality. And that is the very unfortunate thing about this war. Now, as you see, it is no longer the West supplying all sorts of military hardware and equipment to Ukraine. It is now empowering Ukraine to produce Western-style weaponry in Ukraine itself, which means if this sustains, at some point, Ukraine may no longer need to wait for arms supplies to come from the West before it could continue to escalate this war. At the moment, we have seen the war. There's a kind of lull, we have to admit, because it has degenerated more or less into a drone war. And the shocking thing when you listen to this thing is Russia complains about Ukraine's drones attacking some cities of Russia, including Moscow, as terrorist attacks. And this is Ukraine that's almost virtually, in fact, some cities in Ukraine are virtually destroyed. But Ukraine retaliates in some drone attacks, and it is a terrorist attack. So the situation of the war has become dicey and very dangerous for the international community, because any observer will see that the world is realigning itself, is bifurcating between the West, Russia, China, and the other, and so on one side, and the United States and these usual allies on the other. That is a very dangerous development for the international community. When you add that to the impotence of the United Nations, was always inbuilt, because I listened to the former interviewee, and she was kind of trying to blame the UN for not being able to do this or that. But the thing everybody tends to forget is that the strength, the power of the United Nations is simply what the member states, particularly the key member states, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, are able to allocate to it. Outside that, the United Nations has no real power to do anything other than do what Mr. Guterres is doing, suggest propositions, terms that could bring Russia and Ukraine together to agree even on a small thing as a grain deal to feed the world. So this is a really difficult situation we're in. It was predicted, maybe. It's easy to say that Russia miscalculated because they did. If Putin thought this war would last more than 1 year, I have my doubts that he have delved into it as he did, and that's the situation we see. It is not a good one for any part of the world at this time. And if anybody thinks that there's no spillover into the African continent, maybe that person has not looked at the entire picture. I think a proxy Ukraine-Russia war is already taking place in the African continent.
Wow. It's a very sad day when one can consider the United Nations to be impotent, as you put it, but there's, as you've also described, these are the reasons why the UN comes up for such criticism. Also, could we look at how Germany's involvement in the war seems to also further put fuel to the fire, if you like? $5.4 billion. Now their investments, their financial aid for Ukraine. The United States continues to also furnish aid for Ukraine, financially speaking. Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary, was speaking with international media, and he was touting the return of former US President Donald Trump, that he was saying that as a risk of calling one a Trump supporter, that he had at the time the best foreign policy, and that if he was president of the United States at the time that the Ukraine was invaded, it possibly would not have happened. Is there anything any of the leaders of the free world are doing that is helping to put fuel to the fire of this war and not helping to end it?
Probably the opportunity to end the war was missed at the very early stages when Russia was amassing troops, but apparently there was some skepticism as to whether they would really invade, because the Hungarian president's position is a bit faulted by the fact that no matter how powerful a country is, there are rules of international law which guarantee the sovereignty of states, no matter how small those states are. Ukraine is a sovereign country, a member of the United Nations, and all of that. If President Trump was in power and Russia invaded Ukraine and he did nothing, yes, probably the war wouldn't have lasted up to now. But then again, a cardinal principle of international relations, that is the sovereignty of states, the sovereign independence, territorial integrity, and all those high principles of international law that guarantee that small countries exist in peace, in stability and in security, that their affairs are left to them mostly to determine, that would have been totally eroded. And if that is eroded, in Africa here, Nigeria has so many smaller neighbors. What stops us from sending one division to occupy Benin Republic in 1 week? That's just being hypothetical. So the fact that the West tried to assist Ukraine I should say, it wasn't totally altruistic. First of all, it was, yes, in the interest of preserving Ukraine's sovereignty. It was in the interest of upholding international rule of engagement between and among nations, but it was also for their own interest, especially for their own interest, because it's not easy to persuade one that if they had gone on a full diplomatic offensive, empowering the United Nations and other international agencies that have relations with Russia, maybe Ukraine would have settled for something. Maybe Russia would have accepted. But up to now, it's difficult for one to pinpoint what it is exactly that could be put on the table and this war comes to an end. Is it to take away the independence of about 20-25% of Ukraine territory? What is it that will satisfy Russia? I think these are the problems. So the issue involved is not whether Germany is putting money to support Ukraine. It's not whether Turkey, remember that Turkey was seen to be a window of opportunity because President Erdogan had this personal relationship with Putin, and everybody was thinking maybe when the opportunity comes, this will be the country. But Turkey was also pursuing its own national interest. So the moment it gave the nod for Sweden to join NATO, that special relationship with Russia is a bit frayed. And that probably accounts for why the Black Sea-Ukraine deal was discontinued in July. So irrespective of what they say, it is the principles of global engagement, those that guarantee peace and security for everyone. That is what is at stake. Because if Ukraine goes, who knows which other former Soviet republic that Russia might also want to gobble in. And then you have a greater war on everybody's floor, on everybody's zone of the earth. Yes, that's the principle that is important here.
And we hope that it doesn't degenerate to that extent. And we thank you so much for your insight on the situation this morning. Dr. Humphrey Ojako, former ambassador to Switzerland, who joined us from out of Abuja. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
From there, we'll turn our attention to the business side of things and how the war affects business around the world, inside Ukraine and outside. Channels Television business correspondent Ini Janmekwa is in the studios this morning. Ini, good morning. Good morning. We were talking before, and you drew light to the fact that there's some sort of fuel scarcity in Russia.
Yeah, who would have believed that? One of the world's largest producer or owner of crude oil, exporter or supplier of refined oil has domestic scarcity. That's so, in fact, when I saw the story, I had to look for the source because I just couldn't believe it. But now let's paint the real picture. The real picture is that it's mostly diesel and gasoline, which is being used by farmers, and it's happening mostly in the southern part of the country of Russia. So
it's not the whole of Russia?
It's not all of Russia,
right.
And it's not like ours that, you know, you need to go and queue for petrol. Right. It's more about for the machines that are being used, the equipment that are being used for agriculture. But of course, that's a bigger problem because you know that Russia also boasts of grains, you know, and we've even seen their grain exports increase and all of that. So if the farmers are having problems, then it's going to cause a lot of problem. But the government of Russia has come out to say that it's not true, there's no scarcity anywhere. But there are some issues, and they have some things. The farmers and the traders are the ones who are talking, and they're saying that mostly because at this time of the year, there's a lot of maintenance on infrastructure that's supposed to bring, you know, the fuel, gasoline and diesel in this case, to the southern parts of the country. And most of those infrastructure are supposed to be going through maintenance at this time. You know, that's a very well-structured maintenance, if you ask me.
Right.
Then there's also another one. It's tourism season for them, and they say that it seems the railway, which is very active in, you know, bringing the diesel or the fuel to them, is occupied with tourism, tourist activities.
Even now?
Even now, that's what they say,
yes.
You know. And then also, another problem is that the government has talked about reducing subsidy for refineries. So what that means is people are more encouraged to export crude and not refine it at home. So now we're getting to the crux of the matter. We know that ruble has dropped. It's now 95 to $1. So it is cheaper. I don't know if Ladi told you about 1 billion barrels of oil that India bought some time ago, like last week or something like that. So now people who produce crude are more attracted to export it without refining it because the incentive for refiners is reducing. The government has its hand full, so they cannot be as generous as they used to be. Reducing subsidy for refineries means that people will prefer to do business with crude since they don't have that. And then, of course, back inside Russia, the government has a cap. You cannot just hike your price of any fuel at all, you know. So you may not be able to make as much profit as you used to. So you make more profit by selling outside. And so the people at home now are suffering in Russia, at least the southern part of Russia at this time.
As the war continues, the citizens continue to grapple with the consequences of it.
Exactly.
Thank you, Ini.
Thank you
John
for having
Mekwa.
me.
Finally, co-founder and military commander of the Russian mercenary group, Wagner, was buried near Moscow on Thursday after dying in an unexplained plane crash that also killed his son, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Dmitry Utkin, 53 years of age, whose call sign was Wagner, gave the private army its name, was buried in the outskirts of the Russian capital in a ceremony cordoned off by Russian military police. Prigozhin had been buried on Tuesday in an equally discreet ceremony in his hometown of St. Petersburg. Before helping to found Wagner as Prigozhin's shadowy right-hand man, Mr. Utkin served as a special forces officer in the military intelligence service, where he held the rank of lieutenant colonel. He fought for Wagner to support Moscow's military campaigns in Syria and Ukraine and was photographed in 2016 at the Kremlin with President Vladimir Putin. Ukraine, that is Utkin, Prigozhin, and Wagner's head of logistics, Valery Shikalov, were among 10 people who died when Prigozhin's jet plunged from the sky north of Moscow on August the 23rd. And that's it for today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Many thanks for watching to you, our viewers, and also to our producers and our guests for being a part of the program. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a good weekend.